Welcome. I'm Steve Winnick from the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, and I'm here with Emma Björling, who participated in our Homegrown at Home concert series for the year 2020. It's now early 2021, and we're doing a follow-up interview with Emma, who is one of the foremost singers in traditional Swedish folk music today, and we're going to talk to her about Swedish folk music and her own career. So Emma, welcome to our interview series.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. We're really happy to have you here, and we were very happy to have you in the concert series as well, of course.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having me on the concert series. It was so much fun to do it, and we thought this was a special year, especially 2020 was a special year, and all of a sudden we had to learn how to do online concerts. So
right.
It was nice.
So let's talk about that a little bit. How are things going in your area of the world in Sweden and in your region as far as the pandemic and your ability to work and do things over there?
It's been like back and forth, I would say. I live in Denmark, even though I'm Swedish. I live in Denmark, and Sweden and Denmark took pretty different, angles or ways through this pandemic. But in Denmark, during the late spring and the summer and early fall, we could actually do concerts. So even though it was just 50 or 75 people coming, we could still do live concerts. But for the most of the time, we've actually been forced to, or I don't know how to say that, but yeah, forced to do things online. And since I have most of my band members in Sweden, we couldn't even see each other that much.
Right.
That was hard. It was something else, and all of a sudden most of our business was about talking about things on Zoom or Messenger instead of actually rehearsing and singing together. So yeah, it's been quite different.
Yeah, life's been hard for a lot of the musicians that we know, so we're always thinking about you and hoping things will pick up again as soon as it's able to. Let's start talking about your sort of early musical life, your early family life. I know there was some traditional music in your family.
Yeah, my granddad, my paternal granddad, he played the violin, fiddle, and played mostly folk music. But unfortunately, he died when I was 9 years old, so I didn't have that much time together with him. But I still remember, and there are some recordings of him playing. He was a little bit reluctant when people asked him to play. He wanted to play when he wanted to play. But yeah, so that's and my parents met in a choir, and they've always been singing a lot of traditional music in choirs and in vocal arrangements. So I think that formed me a lot with the vocal harmonies and also the folk music that I had from home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I studied all kinds of music because I think that for many people you don't even think that you can study folk music. I think that's a sort of a broad idea in all over the world that well, sorry, I just have to say this. That folk music isn't real music, it's something that you do. It's not a professional thing to do. So I think that even though I studied classical music and jazz before sort of turning back to the folk music, I've always had it with me, and it wasn't until I started studying folk music and aiming or doing most of that I finally sort of realized that that's where my heart is, for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
it's a fun.
yeah.
I was going to say it's a funny thing that because the way folk music is defined for many people, they think that there's no training, as opposed to there's no, typically in traditional culture, no training in a school, but there's all kinds of very intense training in a lot of traditional musics, but people don't necessarily understand that.
Yeah.
So you actually did go to university for traditional music, though. Explain how that works in Sweden, or in the Nordic countries generally, which I know have good programs generally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So actually, in the middle of my teacher's program at another university, I applied to the folk music program in the Royal College of Stockholm, and I decided to take a break from my teacher's program or training, um, to just see if that was something that I wanted to do, the sort of musicians program. And yeah, it's I would say it's very similar to any other genre when it comes to the training. You have music theory, you have music history, you have ethnology. What's that called? Yeah.
We would say
Um,
ethnology, probably. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And all kinds of subject that you need to
Right.
to learn. And then you have all kinds of projects, and yeah, so that was a great experience, I would say, and I learned so much while going there. And I went back and forth between those educations, so I managed to finish my teachers
Hmm.
program, and then I yeah, went for another year at the Royal College in Stockholm with the folk music
Hmm.
education.
And at some point, you made a decision to do music somewhat professionally. That is to say, join bands and tour and do all of that. How did that decision come about? I know it's sometimes gradual for musicians.
Yeah, I think it was for me too, because when I was studying my first year in Stockholm, I went back for a folk music conference in Arvika at the music college that I went to there. For that year, they had the Nordtrad, which is a Nordic traditional music education conference, and it was in 2005.
Mhm.
And there I met some of my like singing friends, but also some new people. And we just sat down and started singing together and realized this is something that we need to do. We just the fit was too good to not continue singing together. And I mean, from the beginning, it was just fun to sing together, and it was just we just did it because we loved it. And then things started to happen, and all of a sudden we had loads of gigs, and we couldn't just do gigs during the weekends and summertime. So we had to sort of make the decision to go professional
Hmm.
or not. And then it was a democratic decision to go professional. And yeah, and I started singing as well with Ranarim,
Hmm.
a pretty famous Swedish band. I was a
Right.
substitute there for a couple of years, and uh, had the great fortune of you know tagging along around
Hmm.
the world, singing with them. And yeah, so I think it's just I loved it,
Hmm.
and I just realized that this is what I want to do. Aside from teaching, I've always loved teaching as well, but I do that quite a lot during the tours, and especially with Kongero, we do a lot of
Hmm.
vocal workshops.
So you mentioned Ranarim, and that was part of a sort of a kind of explosion of activity in Nordic folk music in like the late 90s and early 2000s. That was sort of the scene that you entered, I guess, when you went professional as a musician. So describe that whole scene for us, because I think most Americans aren't familiar with it at all.
Oh yeah, it was. I think we need to go back to the sort of first folk music wave in like the 60s, 70s,
Sure.
because Sweden. in Sweden, a lot of bands formed actually during that time. It was not only the the fiddler or the singer solo acts or the fiddle camps or the sessions. It was also sort of a band movement that started, which was pretty interesting. And all kinds of weird instruments that no Swede had ever seen before, like
Right.
the Greek bouzouki and all kinds of wind and blow instruments that just came into the folk music scene. And yeah, it was pretty intense during those years, and then it sort of just continued with the band movement. And it wasn't, I would say, it wasn't until like maybe 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when it started to, slowly become more of a duo, back to the duo trio settings, and that the big bands weren't as, popular or common anymore. So I think that formed all of us that grew up during the 80s and 90s, and that kind of band, what you can do with a folk music band, that everything is loud. You can just try things, and you can mix it with jazz, or you can mix it with classical music, or you could mix it with whatever you want, and just try out your ideas. So yeah, and Ranarim was absolutely one of the biggest bands, especially with front singers, I would say, that Sweden has had, most like internationally known, alongside with Garmana, and Emma Björling's different bands.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny, when I first met you, it was when you were performing with Kongero at Folk Alliance a few years ago, and one of the songs that you sang that day, which you also sang, it was the first song in your concert for us. I told you afterwards that I remembered it from one of those 70s albums, from Folk Ochrocheri,
Yes.
that they had performed that song, and that's how I'd first heard it. So
Yeah.
so that whole movement has been so, it's been great to observe from far away, but it must have been amazing to be right in the middle of such a lively music scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my parents, they listen to all kinds of stuff. So they listen to classical music and jazz and pop music and folk music. So we had some of those records at home, and they've been, they're pretty scratched
Yeah.
by now. Those records, yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that I think our viewers might be interested in is, of course, we're a government library. We're the Library of Congress here in the U.S. And I wonder the extent to which in Sweden and the other Nordic countries where you've mostly toured, how the government supports folk music.
Mm-hmm. In several different ways, I would say. You can apply for sort of a year-round grant if you're a band or an act or a band. You can apply for a year-round grant that helps you with travel costs for rehearsals or things that you need to buy, or you can basically use them for anything you want except for actual like payment for gigs.
Right.
That's supposed to come from the organizer. And then you can apply for travel grants from several different places. As an individual musician, you can apply from one place, the Arts Council, Swedish Arts Council, and and as a band, we can apply if we go on a tour. And then you can apply for different projects that you want to do, and you can apply from several funds and grants committees. But of course, we have a lot of like smaller funds as well, as you have in the States as well, where you like private funds that you can apply for money as well. But mostly, most bands in the folk music scene, they apply for the travel grants, and some of them apply for the yearly grants. And if you have a good project, of course you could apply for that.
Mm-hmm. And what about things like archives? Do you use the archives that the various government and university sources are around for Swedish folk music?
Oh yeah, I've used both the archives like on site, where you can, well, once upon a time you could
Yeah.
actually come there in person. But so yeah, I've been there. I've searched through the archives there. For a while now they have started digitalizing everything, and so you can find it online now. And also they have actually produced quite a lot of CDs with some, they've made a selection of songs from this area, or
Right.
sailor songs, or from the whole country, or like all kinds of different song types or regions, and made CDs, sort of. I mean, it's documentary recordings, of course, like
Right.
the radio was making. But it's just marvelous, and you can use the CDs, you can go to the archives, you can also find transcriptions in books that they have released, and yeah. So yes, I have used it quite a lot.
All right. So let's talk a little about the kind of the different kinds of traditional songs that you might do. I mean, I know, for example, Scandinavia has a lot of those old medieval ballads. Do you sing any of those songs?
Yes, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
do quite a few. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I
And what
love them.
attracts you to those? What's the appeal of those old songs?
Well, I don't know if I mean, I think it's pretty common to have some kind of romantic view of the Middle Ages, even though it
Yeah.
wasn't that nice. We
All
know
right.
that. And also all the magic. There was always some kind of magic. It was even in religious songs. It wasn't just the Bible verses or words from the Bible. It was magic as well. So it was some kind of mix between the pagan rituals and ceremonies and beliefs, and I think that something enchanting about those those stories, and there's almost always something magic happening in those ballads. It's not always just, well, some of them are pretty violent and just murder or bloodshed, but then
Right.
it just I don't know. I can't, I can't explain it, but I think for me it's the magic,
Mm-hmm.
that it's like a fairy tale, um, and in a lot of cases, actually, because I like happy endings, I've rewritten the ending because there are rarely happy endings.
Yeah, some of those endings can be grim. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think uh, I like the stories, but in some of the cases, I would like to have a more happy ending. So
Right.
you have to use your, freedom as an artist to rewrite the ending.
Sure. And you can also, of course, look for traditional songs of other types. I mean, there are some lovely Scandinavian love songs, old traditional songs. So talk about that repertoire a little bit of, the other side of things.
Oh yeah, lovely, absolutely. But most of them are really, really sad.
Yeah,
They are.
sad songs.
We usually make a joke about it during our shows with Kongero, that it's like that we sing the only happy love song that you can find in Sweden. But there's some truth to it. There are quite a few dreadful love songs, as in most countries.
Hmm.
And I mean, we had sailors that had to go away, and lovers that were parted for a long time. We also had a system that made rich and poor people not able to marry from love. It had to be, you know, you had to have the right amount of land or money. So a lot of songs about that, of course, but yeah, I think very strong emotions. And what is typical about Swedish love songs, I would say, is that they start pretty, you know, hopeful and happy and lovable, and it just goes downwards from there. It's just like every verse gets worse in some sense, and in the end it's dreadful. But the first verses are usually pretty happy.
So you can adjust the basic sort of attitude of the song by cutting it down to the first three verses, you know, making it less.
Yeah, I've
It
done it
gets
several times.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
just
makes
kept a
sense,
few first verses and maybe rewritten an ending or
right?
something. I've done it several times. Yeah.
Nice, nice.
If you want to
Well,
sing at a wedding, you can't sing the last verses, you know.
right, right. Um, and then there are other. I mean, I've noticed on your recordings things like herding songs, a lot of songs for ritual and you know seasonal occasions. So how do you decide what kind of a mix of different songs to put into a project?
Well, it depends pretty much about. It depends on what band it is.
Yeah,
We always make the decisions together. We come with different suggestions to all of my projects and bands, and then we always take a discussion and try it out and say, this is not for us, or yes, let's go for that. And of course, all bands have sort of different, I don't know how to call it, but we tilt to
sure.
one side or another. And I think that when it comes to Lyy, where Petrus
Yeah,
plays well, we tend to choose the happier songs or the more positive messages. When it comes to Kongero, we want to mix, but we are also four people in Kongero coming with with text material. In Lyy, we are only three most of the times coming with text material. So well, it depends, you know. I want
sure.
to mix. I love the sad love songs, but
Hmm.
I don't want to sing only sad love songs. I want to sing happy love songs as well, and medieval ballads with dreadful endings, gouging eyes out and killing people, and dragons and horrific things, but also the maybe the happier ones. So I think it's I think we want to mix, and I think that, but I would think that someone, it's hard to look at yourself and really see what you're choosing. But I think that a lot of my colleagues, they would be able to say that that is a typical Emma song,
Hmm.
or that's something that Emma would choose for one of her bands. Yeah.
Sounds good. So let's talk about the different bands and projects that you're involved in so that you can sort of, because there's a sort of a big spread of different things that you do. It's impressive when you look at the different recordings that you're on, how different they all are. So you already mentioned two of them, but the first place I saw you was in Kongero. So explain that group a little bit.
Yeah, Kongero was also one of the first folk music projects or bands that I started working with. So yeah, we're four-piece female vocal quartet singing what we call folk cappella,
Hmm.
which describes it. I think we made up that word to describe what we're doing. We've been singing together since 2005, or the band has existed since 2005. We have changed members since then a couple of times, but uh, yeah, we sing like all kinds of Nordic, Swedish Nordic traditional folk music, and also self-penned or original
Hmm.
material. And then Lyy, we do what we call Swedish folk pop.
Hmm.
Um, it, we have percussion or drums, a small drum kit, and guitar, and nickel harpa, and fiddle, and voices. So yeah, we a lot of poppy chords and upbeat rhythms and yeah, that's fun. We've existed since 2006 and we are the same members as when we started, so we're looking forward to university our anniversary this year, which we will postpone to next year.
Sure.
Yeah, and then what more? I sang with Skye Consort and Emma Björling, a Canadian, Quebec-based band. Skye Consort has existed for 20 or so years. A trio that's been doing baroque and folk music and early music and all kinds of music. And all the members in Skye Consort and I were doing a project in Montreal in 2017, if I remember it correctly. And that was the first time that we all played together with some other musicians in a big La Nef project in Montreal. And then we just found each other and liked playing together. And then I got stuck in Montreal due to a snowstorm. So I was stuck there for a couple of days and we formed the band.
Like you do.
Yeah. So we had the opportunity to actually start a band. Yeah, and we play Nordic and French Canadian of different kinds, like Acadian and Quebecois music, and some Celtic music. Yeah, so a mix of that. And then I play with a Christmas project in Denmark that is Swedish Christmas music in Denmark.
Nice.
So to mix it up a little bit, because you can get a bit tired of your own Christmas songs, you know. So we thought we should do some Swedish music here. So that's very seasonal. And then I've quite recently started to work with an organist and pianist here in where I live in Svendborg in Denmark. We have set music to poems by a Nobel Prize winning author and poet named Per Lagerkvist, and especially one of his book of poems that's called Aftonland. So we've had one concert so far and working on our future tour dates. Yeah, so I think that was that's what I do most of the time. And
that's a good rundown. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned there was this particular project in which you're working with the work of one poet, but I've noticed on your recordings and in the concert that you did for us, you have also put your own musical settings of poems that are just some of your favorite poems. How did you start doing that? I mean, it's a pretty natural thing to do, but what made you think to do that within your bands?
Oh, that's hard to answer. I don't know. Well, I've always been enchanted by words. I am a bit of a language nerd, and I like words and linguistics. So I think that, you know, when you read a poem and you can sort of hear a melody, or you can see a shape or a form in some way in that lyrics, I think that's something that I've always been intrigued by. I've always loved reading, and you know, I've sort of always heard sort of a melody into the phrases when people, the author's language or use of language, and if the melody isn't there, or if I don't like that typical melody, I don't like that book, you know. So I think I've always instinctively seen sort of a some kind of music into words from when I started reading. So yeah, it just came naturally. But I think what brought me to it was actually I started to set new music to old song lyrics, because I found a lot of old traditional songs that I just love the lyrics. I just love the story, and I didn't like the melody, you know, that much. So I just changed it or put a new melody to that song lyrics. So I think that's where it started, and then I found some poetry that I fell in love with, and then from there it just escalated. I would say.
Yeah, it's a handy skill to have, because I know this is true in English language collections, and I assume that it's true in Scandinavia as well, that a lot of the early collectors who were collecting and writing weren't really able to write down the music before they had recording equipment, and so you have a lot of collections that are just the words, and you need to create music for those in order to perform them. So it's great that you're doing that work and making new songs out of these traditional materials, but also out of poems that you find. I mean, I'm very interested that one of the ones that you performed for our concert was written by a member of the royal family. Talk about that one a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's a story. Yeah, I found this poetry book in an old secondhand store, and I just started reading through it in the store, and I just fell in love with it instantly. And I didn't know much about this Swedish prince. He was, a bit shy and not much of a. He didn't really want to be that public. But he was a fantastic writer and poet. And so I remember sitting in the sofa and just reading through and just hearing the melodies in my head. So I started setting music to a lot of these poems. And I didn't know for what project or for what band. I just set music to it. And then I introduced one of the songs to Lyy, and they liked it, and we started playing it, and we wanted to record it on our first CD. And then we realized, as a member of the royal family, I wonder if we're allowed to do this. We tried to get hold of someone that knew something or that could decide something regarding this. And this was when our crown princess was about to get married. So they had other things, to do at the court, and they were like, "Ugh, we don't have time with you. I understand that you have a deadline, but I can't do anything for you. Just talk to someone else." And finally, we got hold of Prince Wilhelm's relatives that live on Mainau in Germany now. And we got to talk to the lawyer who talked to Prince Wilhelm's wife, who was still alive. I'm actually not sure if she's still alive to this date, but she was at that time. And he got back to me, and they said, "Okay, yeah, you can." It's all fine, we've listened to it, and it's nice, and we like it, so you can do this. And from this time, you don't have to call us when we give you the permission to set music to all his poems. And if you have any questions, you can talk to our contact at the Swedish rights organization. So the royal court has their person there. We've
Excellent.
had quite a few artists and writers in the Swedish royal family, so they have their contact there. Yeah, so that was a long story before we could. We can have it on our CD.
Well, here at the Library of Congress, we're also the home of the American Copyright Office. So we very much appreciate all the work that goes into making sure that you can do something legally in that way.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate your going to all that trouble for that song, which is a lovely song, and people who are seeing this interview will also be able to hear the concert. So we recommend that people go over there and listen to the song after they hear us talk about it, if they haven't heard it already. So another couple of things that I've noticed on, for example, on the Kongero records is, or the CDs, I should say, is that one of the things that you do is to sing fiddle tunes and other things that would otherwise be instrumental tunes. Is that a tradition in Sweden, or is it something that you're innovating when you do that?
It is traditional to do it. Of course, we haven't had as many. I don't know what to call it, lilters
Yeah,
or
lilters is, yeah.
yeah, as we've had fiddlers or instrumentalists, but we've had lilters through the centuries, and yeah, and there are traditional recordings of people singing wordless or mouth music. So, and I think that in many countries there are examples of this, but and I don't know how common in, you know, if you compare it through countries, I actually don't know, but it's been quite common in Sweden. But when it comes to contemporary vocal groups doing it, there we might do it more than others. We just love the groovy dance tunes. Yeah.
Well, one of the advantages that you have as a group is the four very strong voices and the ability to do a lot of different kinds of harmonies. So let's talk about the arranging, because your arrangements are not necessarily what people would think of as purely traditional, but they're using your training in jazz and classical music to create something that's very compelling with traditional music as part of the mix. So talk about the process of arranging songs for Kongero, specifically for the four voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in Sweden, in tradition, we don't really have any good examples of vocal harmonies. We have just a few recordings of people actually singing harmonies together, and it's always been two harmonies in those cases. So we this, like the traditional singing groups, or like the vocal groups singing traditional music in Sweden, we've all been sort of inventing the wheel when it comes to arranging, which makes it really diverse, because there's no tradition in arranging for folk music or folk songs. Yeah, you mentioned that we have a lot of like different knowledge and background. So of course we use the jazz background and the classical background and all kinds of music styles that we've been involved in and trained in. Choir music, of course, is one. So I would say that we have like 5 different styles of arranging for Kongero, and one is the typical modal, like traditional drony type of arrangements that is based upon a drone and maybe 2 drones even, and a melody on top of that. And we rhythmicize those drones and do things with it to make it interesting, but basically it's just a drone, you know,
Right.
through the whole piece, which is really haunting and exciting in that way. And then we have the traditional choir arranging with like a 4-piece chord progressions, and we use that not as much as we use the other types of arranging. And then we have these like typical, like I would say like vocal group arranging, where you have an accompaniment and the melody, and maybe you have a harmony that follows the melody, but you have sort of an accompaniment. And sometimes we do it 2 and 2, and sometimes it's actually an accompaniment of 3 in the bottom and the melody on top of that. So, and I mean, I arrange in a lot of different styles, but you know, and and Lotta arranges in some styles, and Anna arranges in her styles, and you know, it's sometimes the melody sort of gives the arrangement. Like one of the songs that I've written It's a wordless piece from our first CD. It's called Kongero um, which means like king's peace, which is actually the origin of the word of our name, but with a dash in the middle anyway. That melody is almost nothing without the arrangement. So that's sort of built, I would say, I don't know, but vertically, or like,
Sure. Yeah.
so that melody doesn't really say anything without the arrangement.
Yeah.
It's a piece of
Yeah.
music. So there's all kinds of ways of writing music, and I don't know. We just and the fifth way of arranging is jamming. That we do quite a lot when it comes to dance music. We jam away, and things happen. So and we all write in different ways, and that makes it varied, our repertoire. So yeah, was that really answering your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you. I think it's a hard question to be precise about, because you're, as you say, you do it in many different ways depending on the piece. And of course, you've mentioned several times that that the group actually includes quite a bit of self-penned material that you're writing. So what's your approach to songwriting? Are you mostly referring to the tradition, to traditional songs, or are you referring all over the musical spectrum and the poetic spectrum?
I think I write from the heart, and then those songs are, whatever comes out will either be suitable for Kongero or for Lyy or for Skye or for something else or
I
for
see.
nothing, and end up in a drawer. So yeah, I think that I usually don't, of course I write like workshop arrangements, and then I sit down and just, work on that with that specific goal or aim. But most of the time when I just write music, I think it just, what comes, and then I don't know where it will end up, if it, I mean, if Kongero will like it, or if it would be suitable for Skye or for some other bands. Yeah. So I think I just write from the heart most of the time, and I don't refer to anything. But most of the time, it will end up somewhat in the folky style, because that's where my heart is.
Right. That makes sense. So yeah, and so that's one of the reasons why it's handy to have so many different projects that you're working on, is that you come up with a song and then you can figure out which one it suits the best. Well, so we've talked a lot about Kongero, and you've mentioned about Lyy, that pop is one of the references there, that it's a folk pop group. We haven't talked as much about Skye Consort and with Emma Björling. So tell us a little about that group, because it's a very interesting group, and I really enjoyed what you played at Folk Alliance a year ago. So
oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a fun group and fun band. And I mean, that's a little bit different from the other groups that I have, because it's not based in the Swedish or Nordic tradition. It's a mix, as I said before. It's a mix of well, I try to explain it to someone, and I had to, in some applications for showcases and stuff, you need to, like, okay, describe it in like 15 letters or something.
right.
And then I wrote transatlantic chamber folk. So that's what I came up with.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. It is transatlantic, Nordic, Celtic, Quebecois, Acadian. We try to not do, just a Swedish song and then a Celtic song or an Irish song or a Scottish song and then an Acadian song. We try to actually mix them. So either put like an Quebecois and Norwegian piece together, musically or lyrics wise, or something, or find some other connection there. So so it actually is sort of a mix and not just different songs from different places, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's buzuki, nickel harpa, fiddle, and cello and voices. So we are two lead singers. I'm the main lead singer, mainly because I don't play any instruments that good, except for percussion. And then we have Sean, who sings both in French and English,
Right.
who is the other lead singer, but we all sing. And Amanda on cello and Alex on nickel harpa and fiddle. And why we call it chamber folk is because Amanda is really rooted in the Baroque and early music scene, and she's like, that's where her main career is,
Mm-hmm.
I would say. Um, yeah, so and that I don't know, it spills over. Can you say
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
to how sound is, and also Alex is a Baroque violinist, apart from his folk music um, playing. So yeah, the early music and the Baroque music sort of gets mixed in with our sound as our folky sound, I would say. So that's very exciting because that's something that I've never done before, and also I get to sing in English, which is and French, terrifying, but awesome. I love it.
Yeah, no, you were doing a great job when we saw you. So absolutely, a really interesting band to see. And it's interesting because I've noticed in the last few years, not just in the Skye Consort and not just in Canada, but in American folk music as well. A lot more people are bringing the cello into folk music, and it
Yeah.
does give it that chamber string quartet
Hmm.
feeling.
Yeah.
Another instrument that you've mentioned a couple of times, and I know you're not the instrumentalist, but I think a lot of Americans won't know what it is. So if you could explain the nickel harpa, which is in both Skye Consort and in Lyy,
Hmm.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's well, the easiest way to explain it is that it's a bowed hurdy-gurdy that you play with a bow. So it has the same origin. It has. I'll try to show it. It has keys that you sort of play like this and not like this.
Mm-hmm.
As you play the fiddle, you have the keys from you play it sort of with a lying hand or an open palm.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a lot of sympathetic strings. Actually, in the nickel harpa, the like normal chromatic nickel harpa, the most common nowadays, which is a pretty modern
Mm-hmm.
thing, it has 16 strings, and you only play on three. So
Mm-hmm.
you have a drone string, and then you have three like strings that you actually play that you can play different notes on, and the rest of them are sympathetic strings.
Mm-hmm.
So which gives the whole instrument like a huge natural reverb. So and a big sound,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty specific sound, but it has some kind of similarities to Hardanger fiddle, or the Norwegian fiddle
Right.
with sympathetic strings. Sometimes you can sort of, it's a similar sound. Those two instruments have a similar sound.
Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of helps it have that chamber music feel a little bit too, because those sympathetic strings make it sound like a string quartet
Yeah,
just on its own, and then you
yeah,
add the cello to that, and
yeah.
it really sort of creates that sound. So yeah, Skye Consort, another great group that you're in. So thanks for talking about all of those. And one other thing I wanted to talk about, I know that you mentioned at the very beginning that one of your or some of your degrees are in teaching, and that you've been doing a lot of teaching alongside all of the performing work that you do. So talk
Mm.
about yourself as a teacher a little bit.
Yeah, a couple of years after I finished my studies, I actually worked quite a lot as a teacher in a music school where I had a lot of singing students, age 15 or like 10, 12 sometimes, up to 18, 19. But then I started teaching at, I would say it's it's called folkhögskola. It's pre-college or pre-university. And you can study, you can study the normal subjects there to get better grades to get into university, or you can study something artistic or crafts things. So a lot of them have music programs, and I work at a folk and world music program in the north of Sweden, at Framnäs folkhögskola, with the students there. And I've been doing that for 15 years now, I think, almost. Yeah, 12, 13, can't remember. Yeah, a lot of years. So that is, it's, you can study there just because you want to study folk music for a year or two, just because you want it, or you can use it as a bouncing board almost to university, and you get the last little push and knowledge that you need to get into university. And so that's what I do. I have also taught at university, both in Sweden and in Denmark, and a lot of workshops. We do a lot of workshops with Kongero, some with Lyy and some with Skye Consort as well. So choir workshops, or for random interested singers ending up in a singing session for crazy Swedes.
Yeah, and you're doing some of these online now, aren't you? Workshops.
Yeah.
So how can people find out about your workshops if they want to, learn from you?
Oh yeah, we will both websites, but also Facebook pages, and we will advertise our workshops. Kongero will do a couple of workshops, both in Swedish and in English, actually, in April, and in May as well. But we will put the exact dates and times on our Facebook and website. Yeah.
Sounds good. So one thing I realized that I neglected, and it can't neglect Petrus, because he was half of your concert. He was your musical partner for your concert. Yeah. So I know he's a member of Lyy, but you also sometimes play with him as a duo, as you did for our concert. So talk about working with him separately, because he was such a great compliment to you in that concert. So.
Yeah, we've been playing for many years. We met at the music university where we both studied to become teachers in Arvika, Ingesund College of Music. And he was like a pop rock jazz musician, bassist. That's his main instrument, is actually. And then we met and we started to play together, and I just said, hey, can you because he started to fiddle around with the acoustic guitar, and I said, can you find something to play to this song? And then I just started singing a song, and he was like, whoa, what are you doing? And that's actually how I began, and we started playing together in all kinds of constellations and bands, and and he played bass most of the time in the band's situations, but he started to play more and more acoustic guitar, and he had a 12-string that he started out with, and went over to playing a 6-string after a while. But yeah, and tried out some different tunings until he found his way of tuning and voicing. So yeah, I turned him. Well, our meeting turned out to sort of, I don't know how to say that, but I think our meeting turned him into a traditional music guitarist from a jazz bassist. But you can hear it. He uses his guitar very much as a bass instrument, which is one of his great features. The rhythms and the bass lines that I really appreciate when I play with him. And we've been playing so much together for so long time. So I can't really describe our collaboration. I don't know how it happens. It's more, I think, I don't know.
Yeah, it happens almost sort of telepathically, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I can't really explain how it happens.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's great is you mentioned his bass playing contributes to his, it's like an ability to almost sound like two people at once, right? A bass player and a guitarist. And then, of course, he can also sing harmonies with you. And so, it's like it really expands the sound to have one person who's so versatile. So we wanted to make sure to mention him since he's not in the interview, but he was such a big part of the concert.
Yeah.
And
he's a phenomenal musician, and I really enjoy playing with him, and he's a great singer, and so absolutely.
Excellent. Well, so now that people have heard us talk about you and him together as a duo, they can go and watch the concert if they haven't done so already here at the Library of Congress. And with that, I guess we should wrap up this interview just by saying, Emma, thank you so much for being a part of our concert series and part of this interview series as well. We really appreciate it. And we're so happy to have had you in our Library of Congress concert series.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me.